it running.
Okay. I'm often asked how or why I became a writer. And to tell you the truth, it happened in high school. And I had an English teacher by the name of Brian Quealy. And he was my English teacher, and he often liked to come into class and say, okay, class, you've got half an hour, write anything you want off the top of your head, away you go. And this one day he came in and said, I want you to write about 4 topics and 4 separate quick essays, and you have a half an hour, go. So I did, thought of 4 topics and did a sheet of paper on each one. And when I got my mark back, he gave me an A+. And he said, you should consider a career in writing. And he says, I like the way you think. And I went, wow. And that started me thinking about it, and then I started keeping a journal, a hockey journal. It was kind of boring at first, games played and scores, but then gradually I started expanding it about my life, family, not only hockey games, but what was going on. Eventually even got into dating and my job, and that small little journal exploded into probably 3,000 pages of my early life, recorded like a journal. And so I got into writing a little bit that way. And then one day I went to Peggy's Cove for a vacation, and there was a little booklet there by a fellow named William DeGarth. He was an artist, and he had a little touristy book with drawings and history. And I brought it back home with me, and I remember showing my brother-in-law, Yvonne Gagne, the town clerk. I said, you know, Penetanguishene needs a little booklet like this. And he didn't even hesitate. He turned around and he said, well, do one. And I thought, oh, okay. I had liked to doodle and draw a bit, but I'd failed art in high school. And not that I couldn't draw, but I just didn't like all that other technical stuff they taught you. Couldn't get into it. But I did start drawing, and I had a love of history that I actually got from Yvonne. And after about the 24th drawing, it was somewhat acceptable. And then I had in my mind this little booklet I wanted to make. And so I did. A book called Place of the White Rolling Sands. And a buddy of mine went down to a beach. I knew exactly the cover I wanted. I wanted to play in the sand, and I wanted Place of the White Rolling Sands sculpted in the sand. And him and I played for a day. It actually turned out really well, and my first little book did well. I actually sold 1,000 copies within 3 weeks, setting up at Foodland, and back then it was called the IGA, and I had worked there, so the owner let me set up a table outside, and so a little writing career was born. And not long after that, I did another little book about the Martyrs' Shrine, same way. I did drawings, and it was a little booklet that I had done. I knew the history of the martyrs and the local history, so that went really well. But one day I ran into, one evening at a wedding, I ran into a friend of mine named Paul Henry, and he was an NHL scout at the time. And I said to him, we met at the bar actually, and I asked me what I was writing these days, and I said, well, I'm playing around a little bit with this and that, but I said my dream, I was a goaltender, and I said my hero was Terry Sawchuk, and I said it was always my dream to write Terry Sawchuk's story. And he said, well, you should do it. You have a background. I worked at the mental health center at the time, and Terry Sawchuk was well known to have mental issues, psychiatric issues. He said, you're a goalie, you work in the psychiatric field, you're probably perfect to write this story. I'll do anything I can to help you. And that was a whole long process of writing to the family, not getting anywhere, not hearing back from them. going back to see my friend Paul, and I said, I've written the family, I haven't heard. So he said, give me your letter. So he read my letter and he said, I'll call Marcel Pronovo. Marcel scouted for a different team in AHL, so they came in the same circles, and he happened to be Terry Sawchuk's best friend when they played. And he said, I'll talk to the family after he received my letter, and so Marcel loved my letter, said, you're the fellow we've been waiting for to tell this story. Terry had been dead for 20 years at that time, died young, tragically. He had quite an amazing story to tell. And so then he talked to the family, and next thing you know, they gave me their blessing, and away I went. A bit of a crux though, because little did I know that there was another writer doing an unauthorized biography of Terry Sawchuk. So I was in the middle of writing my book. This other Sawchuk book came out, and then the publisher that I had written to and had agreed to publish my Sawchuk story suddenly got cold feet and said, no, you know what, there's already a book out, we think the market's taken. I don't think there's a possibility of doing this book. So I was actually crushed. But I went again back to see my friend Paul, who knew a hockey writer and a newspaper editor by the name of Roy McGregor, who had a cottage up in Huntsville. And he said, I'll talk to Roy. I'm going to send him some of your stuff and see what he thinks. So we sent it to Roy. Roy read it over, and Roy called me and said, you know, what you have here is very special. You have the inside story of Terry Sawchuk. And he says, I would encourage you to keep writing. He says, I hear the other Sawchuk book, the unauthorized book, I hear it's bombing, not doing well. And I think you've got a niche. I think you've got the inside track. If I were you, your writing is good. Just keep going, working on the book. Once you've finished it, let your publisher know that you've finished the book if they'd like to see it. Just send a quick letter. And so I did. And the next thing you know, within days, they contacted me and said, yes, send us what you have, and we want to see it, which I did. And then within 2 weeks, I had an offer. They loved the story. They knew my story was the inside story, not the public story that had been in that other book, which I had some of that stuff as well. But so anyway, my writing career was off. I had a book with a big-time publisher. They were named Stoddard Publishing at the time, and we ended up selling 17,000 copies of that book. With the family's blessing, it was really great. And so my writing career was kind of born. From there, I did another history book about a local legend, and by this time I had befriended another hockey player by the name of Pierre Pilote, lived nearby in Wyvale. We became very good friends, and I also at this time had become very good friends with a fellow named Waxy Grigware, who was a great researcher, and we convinced together Pierre to do a book about his life with the Chicago Blackhawks. He was one of the greatest defensemen of all time, and so we did Pierre's story. And then from there, we ran into another all-time great by the name of Red Kelly. We met him actually at the Hockey Hall of Fame at a stamp unveiling for Pierre and for Red. They had picked the top best six defensemen of the old original six. And so while there, we got talking with Red. I had interviewed him for my Sawchuk book, so he remembered me. And next thing you know, we kind of suggested, Red, well, would you like to do a book? And he, well, I've been thinking about it, but I'm not too sure. So before we had done this book, I had done a coffee table book about St. Anne's Parish. And that book came in handy for Red because Red was a very devout Catholic. So I remember Red was not too sure about doing a book. You know, he had a great career, a great story. And so I remember sending him a Sawchuk book. he read it, and then he called me. I called him. I called him, and he said, "Well, I'm not too sure." So end up sending him a Pierre Pilote book, and he read the book, and he said, "Well, I'm not too sure." But this time I'm starting to think, well, maybe he just wants to collect my books. I'm not too sure. But anyway, I sent him a copy of the St. Anne's Coffee Table book. It was a book about the parish, our parish history here at Penetanguishene, St. Anne's Jesuit Memorial Church. And he no sooner got it, within a week he called me and he said, "Okay, let's do the book." So that was a 2-year project of writing his story. And the great thing about that was that it went on to win the Ontario Speakers Award of 2016. We beat out 50 other books, and that was a really great thrill to be there, and a great thrill for Red. And so, you know, I guess been writing my whole career. My whole life now has been in writing. But you know, what always was in the back of my mind was a story about a boy who would become a priest, and then who would become a cardinal, and who would become the Pope, the last Pope at the end of the world. I had this story in my mind ever since I was about 20 years old, before I actually even started really writing, because I was a student of history. I loved history, and in the summer of 1978, Pope Paul VI had passed away, who had died after a 15-year pontificate, and I was really attracted by the history of it, picking a new pope, and I found that all kind of intriguing as someone who loves history. And there's no more greater history than Vatican and church history. So that was interesting. And then me and some buddies went to Niagara Falls camping this one weekend in late August 1978. And I remember going into a corner store that Sunday morning, and next thing you know, I see the headline, "New Pope elected." New Pope, his name was John Paul I. His name was Albino Luciani. He had a beautiful smile. Yeah, even in the cover of the paper, you know, his smile just lit you right up. He looked like a beautiful person. And I remember coming home and seeing my sister, who was very enthralled and so excited about this new Pope. And I kind of was too, and I was living with my sister and my brother-in-law Yvon at the time. And so Yvon got the paper every day, the Toronto Star, and so I would get it and I would peruse it, and of course they had lots of stories about the new Pope, and it was all very exciting. Didn't mind it all that much as far as getting me really, really intrigued until the morning of September 28th. It was a Friday morning. I remember getting up to go to work, and the radio came on, and it was a shocking news story, the death of Pope John Paul I. After only 34 days as Pope, he had died suddenly. And it was a shock. I remember feeling sad. I remember going to work feeling sad, and for some unknown reason, I don't know what it was, but I started keeping a scrapbook from that day on, cutting out the newspapers that Yvon got. I would cut them out and glue them in a scrapbook, and that really got an interest in papal history, church history, and how it all went together with world history, and of course the election again of another pope, the funeral of the past pope, and so that really got me going in it. And I could not put this story out of my head. I got involved in researching, buying books about novels. Morris West was a great novel writer from Australia, and he had written this book called The Shoes of the Fisherman, and actually they made it into a movie starring Anthony Quinn. And I remember watching it and becoming completely wrapped up in the whole thing of popes being elected, and what it means to the world, and what it could mean for world peace. And So then Morris West had a whole trilogy of papal trilogies about, the first book was The Shoes of the Fisherman, then his second book was The Clowns of God, and it was an amazing, Clowns of God was my favorite. It was a book about a pope who experiences a vision about the end of the world. It actually probably got me going again, that he's at the Vatican and he's in the garden reading and praying, and he suddenly looks up and the world is toast. There's nothing in front of him, it's just waste. It's all black and smoky and there's nothing left. And he realizes it's a message from God. He subsequently tells his story to a few people, and then the cardinals think he's crazy and they force him to abdicate. And he finds his way in the world, and so that was a great story. And then there was his final book in this trilogy was a book called Lazarus. And there was a book about a pope who was a real bugger. Everybody hates him. He's miserable. He's an awful fella. Got elected as a compromise, and he was an awful fellow, and nobody in the world liked him at all, much less loved him. But it turned out he had a bad heart, and he subsequently has heart surgery, major heart surgery. And when he comes out of it, he suddenly starts realizing the kind of person he was. And so the rest of the book is how he starts to slowly change. Nobody believes he's changed, but he does. And so that book was called Lazarus, and it was a great book. But it continued my interest in papal stories, and so I had started writing this story about a boy who would become a pope at the end of time. I never typed. I remember writing out 2,000 pages in longhand, and that's where it stayed, in a box, in a cupboard. Everything else got in the way: kids, marriage, volunteering, and other books, hockey books. And so this story was always put to the side. So it wasn't until about 4 years ago I realized that I have to write this book. I have to write this story. And at the time, it was just a story about a boy who would become a pope and his journey. But then by this time, there'd been a book in the 1990s called The Celestine Prophecy. Went on to be a New York Times #1 bestseller for 2 years. And it showed that people are searching for answers. People are full of spirituality. There's a lot of spirituality in the world. Even if people don't belong to a religion, people are searching. People are searching for meaning in their life, why we're here, what's a greater force than us, that kind of thing. And then in the 2000s, another book came out called The Da Vinci Code. And but by this time I had started working with a friend of mine's sister named Denise Hayes, who was a stay-at-home mom at the time. She had been a secretary. She started typing my novel up, and typed all 2,000 pages, and then there it sat until 4 years ago. And then once my other projects were out of the way, I said to myself, I have to write this story. And to tell you the truth, I wasn't sure of the angle I would take. I realized that I needed some kind of a different angle than just the boy. And I started searching and researching different saints and seers. Like, I was always captivated by Nostradamus, Saint Malachi.
Okay, I just want to let you know I've only got 10 minutes left.
Oh, okay.
On this, and it's okay. Going to be honest with you here. It's a bit rambly. I know it's facts and information leading up to Hildegard.
Yeah.
But I'm sort of not sure where you're at question-wise there. Can you just show me?
Actually, only half.